there's two sides to every coin. Then there's a conversation you can join. But I'm an old dog and there's new tricks. And some of my opinions you just can't fix. 'Cause I'm an old man yelling at the sky. I'ma shake my fists at the clouds and cry. Get off my lawn, you snowflake, before I have a meltdown, breakdown, shakedown. 'Cause this is my hometown, so back down, sports clown. It's all just a game, and it's the last down, let down, cowtown. I said it's all just a game. I give the touchdown, the rundown, the lowdown. 'Cause it's over the game, gonna crack down and shut down, the sundown. I said it's all just a game.
Hey kids, happy Friday to you as we head into the Victoria Day long weekend. I am me, you are you, and welcome to Just a Game. I was a delinquent on Wednesday, not here, thanks to Danny Austin, Cami Kepke, Peter Marr, and others. It was a great show, far better than I would have been capable of putting on Wednesday. So I appreciate Danny jumping into the breach. He'll do it again a week from today. We won't have a show on Monday because it's a long weekend. Although, who knows? I mean, crazy things have happened. As we were preparing for this show, just assumed we'd be at the end of a week before a long weekend and talk about a spectacular hockey game last night to kick off the Eastern Conference Final. Some news and notes and names and things, and we got some good guests to do it. And all of a sudden, a couple of hours ago, the Toronto Maple Leafs decided that they didn't want Kyle Dubas anymore, so they let him go. So the world, according to some, tipped on its ear. We're doing the right show for this because we have a former NHL general manager joining us. It's been a long time for me, so I'm really excited. Just because of that silliness that is, or pettiness, whatever you want to call it. Well, you're on TSN, so you can't go on Sportsnet, and you're on Sportsnet, and you can't go on It's funny how Fox and ESPN don't seem to have that problem down in the States, but we still live under those archaic, barbaric rules. As a result, I was, for many years, not allowed to speak on the air to our guest, but we had many coffees, many lunches, many breakfasts, and I learned a lot from him. So I'm really excited that Craig Button's going to join us today from the Cool Button podcast, and of course, TSN's director of scouting. Also, it is his rotation, his turn, and he is back in town. So joining us live in the Oodle Noodle studio will be Eric Duhatschek from The Athletic. The Arizona story broke earlier this week. Want to shed a little light on that. Maybe kind of temper some of the conversation about it. I'm all for Quebec City. I'd love to see Quebec City. But I think the reality of the situation is the NHL does not want to overload one conference versus the other. So I think that they're looking at Western locales to, if they have to move Arizona. Of course, yesterday the Coyotes, just after dinner our time, I believe, put out a social post. Hey, Coyotes fans, where should we go? And, still working to keep the team in Arizona. Again, look forward to having Craig on. Craig, with a really strong relationship with Gary Bettman, can probably give us a little insight. I know Gary. I respect him. I know what he's all about. But even I sometimes wonder. I get the size of the television market. I get that. I think it would really work well in Scottsdale. I have no problem saying that. Scottsdale's where it should be. That's Tempe where it should be, downtown Phoenix where it should be, but that's not where it's been for most of its existence. And the NHL's fought really hard to keep that team in Tampa. Meanwhile, the local hockey heroes, NHL version, remain GM-less. And I would suggest to you that nothing has changed on at least on my point of view. I don't know about you. Does Kyle Dubas change the? No, it doesn't change the scenario. I still think Craig Conroy should be evaluating if this is the right job for him, not whether or not the Flames should evaluate whether or not Craig Conroy is right. And also, and I do want to get into it with both Craig and Eric. The reporting first reported by Frank Seravalli, I believe last week, and then again brought up by Pierre LeBrun of The Athletic, that the Calgary Flames are refusing to allow Brad Treliving to interview with other teams and will hold him to his contract up until June 30th. And that's an interesting conversation too, and where people land on that. There's some really good friends of mine that have said, "Hey, I'm not no problem with it." I think it's silly. I think it's, you've moved on, he moved on. You said all these nice things, but now you're not going to let him apply for these jobs. The teams want these GMs in play. Oh, but Rob, he'll take all. No, it's not how it works. He has to sit the draft. It's been done before. You sit the draft out. When John Weisbrod was hired by Jay Feaster as his right-hand man, Weisbrod had to sit the draft out. I've seen it before. It's been done before. This is just, I don't know. I have opinions on it, but for me to start spouting opinions would sound a little more like sour grapes. So I'd rather have our experts and our insiders spout their opinions on this. Let's go back to last night. Do want to touch briefly, just a little bit on the Stanley Cup playoffs, which continued briefly. A game that went into 4 overtimes. So nice they played it twice. The Panthers getting a goal from some kid named Kachuk. You really thought in the third period that the Hurricanes, okay, they got their feet under them, they're at home, they're going to rally back. They just, really kind of dominated. But they couldn't get that go-ahead goal, and then you're stuck in that, just seems like over and over and over and over again. Back and forth and breakdowns, but no goals. So the Panthers get an early 1-0 lead in this series. I don't think it's going to be a short series. I don't buy into the, it's devastating to lose game 1 and, in quadruple overtime. These are pretty evenly matched teams. Well, the one thing that and somebody reminded me of this today, I think it was Darren Haynes, actually, our friend, our pal, our buddy from CP. They underachieved too, right? If you look at what the expectations were for the Florida Panthers, yes, they said goodbye to Mackenzie Weegar and Jonathan Huberdeau, but they brought in Matt Tkachuk, and this was a President's Trophy team last year. They were life and death to make the postseason towards the end of the year, not unlike the local hockey heroes. But in the grand scheme of things, if you were flipping through your August edition of the Score Hockey Pool Guide and somebody was doing the predictions, it wouldn't have been crazy to predict Carolina and Florida in an Eastern Conference final. And that's what you ended up with. So long, drawn out, overtime. Tkachuk ends it. It's good for, I think it's good for the reporters because it shakes up the stories and you don't have to write the same old, and you don't have to dog the referees or the league or anything. And now tonight we get Vegas playing host to Dallas. Really observing the goalies in this one because Jake Ottinger has not been the Jake Ottinger that we saw last year in the series against Calgary. Not even close. He has moments, but not close. And Aiden Hill, who's number 4, 5 on the, depth chart, depending on how you look at it, at least third, has bounced around a little bit and finds himself thrust into the playoffs now after an injury to Laurent Brossoit, who wasn't scheduled to be the number 1. And you know what? Aiden Hill was great. He was great against the Oilers in the closeout game. He's probably a little fresher than everybody else. And we'll see. Both of these teams can score. Both of these teams have lots of reasons to predict and bet money on them, I suppose. I'll take Dallas because I feel compelled to make a choice. Oh, I guess I didn't. I'll take Florida in the other one. Oh, but they won. Yeah, probably. Okay. I just feel compelled to take. I honestly, of all the multiple combinations of final series we could get, I none of them seem that far-fetched to me right now. Far-fetched earlier, sure. Far-fetched at the beginning of the postseason, absolutely, but not right now. All of these teams are, deserving of what they've done. I don't think anybody's had a free ride. Vegas had to beat Edmonton. Dallas got pushed by Seattle. The closest to a free ride, I guess, is Carolina. They haven't really been pushed hard. In games, I suppose, by the Islanders and New Jersey, and of course Florida had to go to 7 games against the President's Trophy winning, record-setting Boston Bruins, and then depositing the Toronto Maple Leafs in 5, which apparently again brings us back to our news story of the day, which is Kyle Dubas is no longer with the Maple Leafs, and the Leafs have put out the release. So the Leafs fired him. I mean, he was due a new contract, not unlike Brad Treliving. His contract is going to run out on June 30th, but he was relieved of his duties. The Toronto Maple Leafs will now, begin the search for a new general manager. Rumor, that's all it was. Midway through the season, when the Leafs probably lost 2 games in a row, that and Brad Treliving and the Darryl Sutter stuff was bubbling up. I think there was some attachment of Brad Treliving to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and if that's what you want, if that's the job, I wish he could have an opportunity to go get it. Again, being reported that the Flames aren't allowing him to interview with teams. He wasn't allowed to interview with Pittsburgh. We'll see. The Dubas one, and that's why I wanted to talk to Craig and a little bit with Eric about it. The Dubas one is not a head scratcher, but it seems familiar in a way that, well, if you were going to fire him, why did you let him talk? You let him talk, and he caught everybody's attention by being honest and real. And we're still, in some quarters, still struggling, I guess is the best way to put it, with old school, new school, this school, whatever school you go to. And he was just honest about the impact it had on his family. He was honest about the burnout. I have not talked to Brad Treliving about burnout. I have no idea. But a lot of people were surmising that after 9-10 years with the same job and the ups and the downs, that maybe he felt burned out too. That seemed to carry the week in Toronto as far as the Maple Leafs went. They had some Blue Jay stuff to deal with too, but in Toronto, it certainly felt like Dubas's admission that it was impacting his family. He had to talk to his family. I think we were all led to believe on Monday, or felt on Monday, that the decision would ultimately be Dubas's, whether or not he came back. But, again, the veteran reporters would tell you, but you haven't heard from Shanahan yet. You haven't heard from Shanahan. And I understand that Brendan Shanahan will be speaking later today, is what I believe is going to happen. What does that do? Do the Calgary Flames, Don Maloney now calling Kyle Dubas to see if he's interested in the Calgary job? Monday, Dubas said, it was up to his family, and if he wasn't coming back, he wasn't going anywhere else. But already there's speculation. What about Ottawa? Well, last I checked, Ottawa wasn't looking for a general manager. 9 years, Kyle. So Dubas and Treliving in their markets are essentially the same length of time. I do remember the two stories at the time. Brad Treliving was the guy that's done it all, started a professional league, which he did, the Western Professional Hockey League, came up through the ranks, I believe he was the commissioner of the CHL at once, the Central Hockey League, the old Central Hockey League, did everything for the Arizona Coyotes, and really, in a lot of ways, like Craig Conroy had done everything that you could do to prepare yourself to be a general manager, whereas Dubas was the wonder kid, right? The analytics guru, 26 years old, out of major junior, and who calls it major junior anymore? Just me, I guess. But junior hockey, and was he too young to be the head, the general manager of the Maple Leafs, all those sort of things. How times have changed. And, the same thing could be said about a guy whose name gets thrown into a lot of combinations every once in a while, too. I've lost temper. Oh, John Chaika. So, it's a crazy. Oh, I have a little bit of an issue here. So, Jack, if you can come in here, apparently I gave somebody the wrong email, so Craig hasn't got the link. It's hard for a guy to come on the link or on the show without the link, and I have to get him that link. Jack, if you're listening in the back, can you come out here? I know Gav's asking for it, or asking me to. Maybe I can do it this way. Can you get a hold of, there's the email on there. And can you get that to Gav? And can you text Craig back? He's looking for the link. So that'd be perfect. Oh, I'm old. Sorry, folks. The guest does want to come on, and we will get him the link right away here. And I mentioned before that our good friend Eric Duhatschek is going to join us in studio. I just got back from California, so we are going to get our guests on here right away. Should mention locally, we have not. Well, we talked a little bit about the Flames. So it's Game 5 of the third round of the American Hockey League playoffs tonight. 1-0 win by the Wranglers on Wednesday night. This is it. All the marbles, win and go on, lose and go home, all of those sort of things. Coachella Valley and the Wranglers, which finished 1-2. So we really shouldn't be surprised by this. And here we are. We've got a game 5 tonight, and we have a game 3 tomorrow at the Dome, as the Calgary Roughnecks will play host. The Roughnecks will play host to the Colorado Mammoth. So we're wishing, of course, Mike Board, our friend of the program, good luck. And if he doesn't win, then Andrew McBride, friend of the program, who is an assistant coach with the Mammoth, that'll be second prize. Leads me to believe there's lots of tickets available, because I'm seeing lots of price breaks and stuff like that. So with the weather being the way it is, being a long weekend, people going camping and stuff like that, I suspect they're going to have to work really hard to get a lot of people in the building, which they do. Not taking a shot, just the reality of the situation when we're so used to having poor weather in this country around this time of year, and we're having great weather. I suspect that the campgrounds are absolutely going to be full. So I had one job. Did he get it? Are we good? All right. Anyway, we're I'm old. Technology's past me. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Gav. And we'll thank Craig if and when we can get him. What a crazy, crazy week. Sorry. The other thing I was going to mention just before we go to Craig Button, just in the world of hockey, we are getting closer and closer to the Memorial Cup. So that's another thing we can probably ask Craig about too, because he's going to be paying close attention. We're like a month away in a couple of days from the draft. Like, this is crazy how how this off season seems to have sped by because of my big sausage fingers. Let's get to our guest right now, because we've already wasted his time. I apologize. Brought to you, of course, by Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. 76 years in Calgary. Think about it. Beautiful weather right now, but what if you got a little extra? Is this the time to go out and get some, new skis? You betcha. Head on down to Ski Cellar Snowboard. Check it out online, skicellarsnowboard.com. It has been forever since our next guest and I have been able to do this publicly. We've done this privately, but because of the silliness and the pettiness of telecoms, we were never allowed to talk to each other that much. And I do credit him for being a hell of a mentor and a hell of a teacher. So it's so nice to have Craig Button be able to come on this program and spend some time with us. Craig, it's good to see you.
Oh, it's great to see you, Bob. And one of the things that I'll share about the story with you, I was in Switzerland for the World championship. We went over great ski. I'm walking down the street and I see a ski sale. Great skis, half price. And I'm thinking to myself, should I buy these skis? And I'm thinking, yeah. And I'm going, how am I going to get them home? And do you know what I thought? I said, I can get good skis like this at home on a good deal. So ski skeller and snowboard, you'll expect to see me.
I'm happy to hear that. And Neil will be happy to hear that. You look awfully good. You look really dressed up for a podcast. Something tells me that you're going to have to go to work here right away. Surprised by today's announcement in Toronto that Kyle Dubas is not coming back?
Well, I'm going to answer that question in a second. Listen, Oodle Noodle. I am here, okay, to make sure that I present reasonably. Like, it's not everybody that I put a tie on for.
No, I know.
But so that's what I do. But you're right. There is other obligations that I have. One of them is to talk about the change in Toronto, a significant change. Am I surprised? No, not at all. I'm not surprised at all. I was listening to the first 10, 12 minutes of Brendan Shanahan's press conference. He talked about the tone and the tenor of Kyle's press conference on Monday, end of season press conference, and how Brendan started to view it very differently. He started to feel that, maybe he needed to look in a different direction. And he went through a timeline. He went through a very detailed timeline from Monday, and even before Monday, even back to last summer, but specifically from losing out last Friday to Saturday to Sunday to Monday till today. And he came to the decision that he needed to make a change. And I think it was largely predicated on, where Kyle found himself. But I think just as importantly, where Brendan found himself is, he acknowledged that the job is a demanding one. It takes a toll on everybody. And that's what you sign up for. And I think that, if you're going to be the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, if there's other things that are impacting your ability to do the job, then you got to focus on those things and not, you can't do the job. Brendan was very clear in saying that Kyle wanted to do the job. So in Brendan's mind, it changed. It changed on Monday with Kyle's press conference. I arrive here today, not surprised one bit that Kyle Dubas is not the general manager. And I'm not just basing it on Monday. I think that as a manager, you recognize at different times what the tasks are in front of you to improve the team. I mean, Kyle, nobody's going to say that Kyle didn't do a very good job with the Toronto Maple Leafs. I mean, that would be ludicrous to say that. Yeah. But sometimes the hardest steps are the next steps. The steps that say, what are the really, really serious considerations I have to undertake to put this team in a better place? Those are not easy. And whatever those pressures are or whatever Kyle was feeling, I think Brendan started to feel that Kyle wasn't the right guy to make those decisions. And I can understand why you would arrive at that decision. He built the tenet of his philosophy was built around the core four. He signed them, but that was 5 years ago, and a lot has changed in that time. And he can't keep hanging on to 5 years ago. And I think that Brendan came to that conclusion that somebody different needs to make those decisions.
So help me understand this a little bit better. Take me back to Monday from your perspective, because I had mentioned it a while ago. Not my team, just watching from afar. I don't have a dog in the race, and I saw the press conference, and I thought it was very honest. And Dubas did talk about the impact on his family, and that he had to talk to them. Did anything in that press conference jump out to you? Did any of that part jump out to you, Craig?
Listen, I think the honesty, you respect the honesty, but to Brendan's point today, everybody feels pressure. Every single person feels pressure. And, for him to acknowledge it, that's great. I don't think anybody wouldn't acknowledge, whether you be a coach, whether you be a player, whether you be a manager, when you're in the spotlight of professional sports. And when that spotlight becomes brighter in bigger markets, and Toronto certainly is the biggest market, you feel those. So I respect Kyle's, you know, his honesty, being forthright and talking about it. Well, it's also to Brendan's point, if this is affecting you and you can't make the hard decisions, then it's going to impact your family. That's going to impact you in a negative way. Then you simply can't be the manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And quite frankly, that's how I felt on Monday listening to him. I felt that Kyle had reached a point where he really wasn't sure if he was cut out to take the next steps. Brendan, you didn't see the press conference. Brendan said right up until yesterday, Thursday, that Kyle said he wanted to come back as GM. And one of the things that Brendan said that he was negotiating with Kyle's agent for a long period of time. They thought they had the parameters of a deal. And Kyle, the agent, came back on Thursday with a very different contract proposal that Brendan said wasn't part of any of the discussions. It changed pretty significantly. And combined with that, and was that Kyle's way of saying, I'll stay under these conditions? You know, I'm not, Brendan didn't say this. I'll say it for Brendan. I think Brendan felt blindsided.
Okay.
That's what, like, if you're negotiating over a long period of time, Rob, and you feel that you've come to a point that's really good and everybody's happy, and both parties have expressed that, and then all of a sudden something changes at the last second.
Yep.
Like, that's being blindsided. And Brendan didn't say that. That's my word. I want to be very clear on that. Yep. But that's what it felt like. Brendan felt blindsided, and probably just another reason to just say, listen, nobody ever wants to resign from a job, but you can't be straddling the line. You're either in or you're out. That's the way I feel. I think Brendan came to the point and said he's not in. And whether he was 60% in or 80% in, the job requires you to be all in.
And I respect that, and I understand that. And there's an old adage about players: if once they start talking about retirement, they may as well be retired, right? But I feel compelled to ask the question, though, Craig, and I have enough trust in you. You know where this is coming from. As someone who did get burnt out, when somebody comes and says, geez, this was hard on me and hard on the family, and that might lead to them not coming back, is that going to push some people to second guess what they say? Are they going to internalize? Are they going to keep from being honest about the impact of them? I feel a little conflicted about what I'm hearing here.
I don't think you should feel conflicted. I don't think there's anything wrong with honesty. You know what? They're mutually exclusive but inclusive. For you to do the job, it requires you to be fully invested in the job. If there's things that are preventing you from being fully invested from the job, you know, whatever they may be, you have to recognize that, and everybody has to recognize that and say, okay, you know what? Then under the purview of this job, you know what? You're in a place right now where you can't lend your full, and we respect that, and I think we've reached a point where people have found a way to be more open about it, and I have no doubt that whatever Kyle needs in terms of being able to deal with the pressures, to deal with the disappointment of not having this job anymore, that MLSD will deliver that for him. But so that's why I say they're mutually exclusive but inclusive, right? Like and like I said, like I think that Kyle being forthright and honest and talking about his feelings was really, really something that we should all take to heart, and we all should recognize it. And part of the challenge that we have, Rob, is that we end up in places sometimes where things are adversely affecting us. And two things that we, I don't want to say struggle with, but that we're afflicted with. Number one, that we really, really like the job, and we really don't want to admit that we might not be able to do it. And then number two is being open about saying, this is the reasons why I can't. I think the second part, we've reached, I think we've made some strides in being able to say that. But the first part, I think that's where Brendan had to get to. He had to say that, you know what, you've expressed to me now that I don't really have the faith and confidence that this is something that requires your full investment isn't there. And I respect that too. You can respect both sides of that.
Absolutely. And I'm glad I asked the question because that helps out. So thank you for that. One of the, obviously we can tie it to the local story, but I'm more curious as a former general manager and a candidate for a job, and that with this position coming open, and somebody like Brad Treliving, who we are understanding that the Flames are not allowing to talk to teams, is that okay? Is that copacetic? Is that, I'm not, again, sorry, Craig, I didn't expect you to come on and solve all my problems for me, but I don't know how I feel about that either.
It's okay. I mean, hey, listen, you know what? You've helped me solve problems in the past. I'll try to help you solve some problems right here in the present. No, that's what friends do. They try to help each other out, exactly. Right? Like, yeah. So here's what I would say about the situation with Brad. And, people say that I'm just, that I'm making it just one way or another. Brad signed a contract that expires on June 30th.
Yep.
And, he's the one that signed the contract. So whatever that contract says, if it says that the Flames do not have to grant the permission, or it says they do, you live by the contract. Murray Edwards knows lots about contract law. And so what I would say is, you asked me if it's copacetic. If you don't think it's copacetic, Brad should have thought about that when he signed the contract.
Right.
I look at it really simply, Rob. You know what? Don't start whining to me. I'm not saying you, and maybe that's the wrong that's the wrong word to use. No, I want to take that word out because that's the wrong word to use. Okay. You can't start complaining about something that you agreed to.
Nope.
And so I think in this respect, Brad's I get it. Brad's eager. He's anxious. He wants to interview for jobs. He wants to be in the mix. I understand that. But you can't now say, well, this is what, but I don't really like that part of it. Because it works, it cuts both ways. Because what happens if somebody, if you want it that way, what happens if Murray, and I'm just using Murray or an owner, I'll keep Murray out of it. What happens if an owner comes to an employee and says, you know what, we agreed to pay you X, but you know what, you didn't make the playoffs, so, we're going to cut your salary by 10%. Well, that's not what we agreed to.
Yep.
So it cuts both ways. So to me, it like I look at it, and that's the way it has to be. And as unfortunate as Brad may look at it or others may look at it, I really break it down to its simplest terms.
So speaking of simple things, I know that Gary Bettman very well. We've had many conversations with Gary. The news out of Arizona this week, and they don't move ahead with Tempe. What's happening with Gary and his staff right now? Gary's a prepared individual. Mm-hmm. What is going on at the NHL offices right now when it comes to the future of the Arizona Coyotes in that state?
I'll answer this in a macro level because it's applied to the way he's operated with all franchises in the National Hockey League. You're always working, with the ownership and the local authorities, when you're in a place and you have a franchise established there, you want to do everything you can to make it work. You want to understand what potential solutions are, what the challenges are, what the commitment is from the owner, from present ownership there, and everything that goes with it. And until those are exhausted, Gary is going to be committed to that market. I mean, he exhausted everything he could with Atlanta before he realized, understand too, like people say he left Atlanta. There was nobody willing to come and buy the Atlanta Thrashers to keep it in Atlanta. So I can't speak for the present owner in Arizona, but that has always been Gary's mantra. That's how we're going to operate. And Rob, he's operated that, and I always remind people, he did it with the Montreal Canadiens back in 2001. He did it with the Ottawa Senators. He did it with the Calgary Flames. He did it with the Edmonton. And a lot of people don't realize that his fight for those four Canadian teams was significant. People say, oh, he doesn't like Canada. That is false. Yep. And the late Harley Hotchkiss, the late great Harley Hotchkiss was the chairman of the board of governors and, instrumental with respect to, being a Canadian voice. And Gary took that Canadian voice seriously. But you don't want a league to be jumping here, there, and everywhere. Now, we can look at the Arizona situation on a micro level and talk about, it just seems that they can't get any traction there.
Mm-hmm.
That's disappointing to the NHL. It's disappointing to the new owner. What the solutions are now, and Gary will have a whole list of solutions. And okay, what's the viability of this? What's the viability of that? What makes sense? And relocation will be one of them. Like but you got to look at, and under the current CBA, and we all see that there's no perfect CBA. There's pros and cons to every CBA. So I'm going to just leave that alone for now. But under the CBA, you have to contribute to revenues. You can't just take from the revenue pie. And, that's where expansion came in with Vegas and Seattle. And people go, why not Quebec? Well, the evaluation of Quebec up to that point in time was, can they sustain? It's not just putting people in the stands. It's sustaining a revenue model that is essential to the CBA for the owners and the players. So that's where I talk about viability. And, you have an owner that's very committed. He came in and bought the team. He had a plan. He's got to be massively disappointed about the referendum. And it was resoundingly defeated. So, when it's close, you could go, okay, why? But it seems like it doesn't have traction to go any further. So now you got to look at other options, and relocation has to be one of them. But Gary has always been committed to trying to find every reasonable opportunity to keep a franchise in its present location. And if that is exhausted, then a franchise will move.
Yeah, and I listen, you're absolutely right about we have short-term memory, don't we? Because we forget about the work that was done to keep the markets in Canada. And quite honestly, they've done a remarkable job with Ottawa. Somebody, Forbes valued it at what, 450 million, and now it might go for $1 billion. That doesn't happen by accident, Craig. Right?
No, it doesn't, and it doesn't happen with a league that isn't strong. And again, there's pros and cons to it, but and I talk about this with agents and league executives at different points in time. This league has grown to 32 teams. The jobs, the business is now $5.5 to $5.8 billion. Just think about how franchise values are up, right? And like I said, is there something that's perfect? No. The next CBA that's perfect will be the first one. But there is nobody that can argue about the viability of this league. And nobody should compare it to the NFL or the NBA. Take it as the NHL and what has happened and what has been done and go from there. But you talk about Ottawa, a lot of owners in this league are looking very favorably on somebody willing to come in and buy that franchise for near that amount. And then you go from there. That's exactly what ends up, creating a sense of security in buying a franchise.
Oh, absolutely. I am curious as a player evaluator, and it's really noticeable to me that Vegas and Seattle come in and we just did not have the hue and cry about the drain on talent that we had when Ottawa and Tampa Bay came in, and Columbus and Minnesota. It just always seemed like at that time it was, wow, we're diluting the talent. There's not enough talent. You were around during those, the Nashville and the Minnesota expansions, the Columbus expansions. Is there more talent globally now than there was then, or are we just used to it, for the lack of a better term?
I think I would answer that question in two ways, Rob.
Okay.
I think that, yes, very much so, there's more talent. And I think, number two, there's been a development of more talent. One of the things, let's just look at Austin Matthews coming out of Arizona. Let's look at the Sun Belt. Look at how many players are coming out of non-traditional hockey markets because you have a presence there. If you go and look at all the different markets that are what we would call non-traditional hockey markets, just look at all the minor hockey programs that have been created. Yep. Boys and girls. Yep. And I remember Jim Lights when we moved down to Dallas in 1993. Jim Lights had come from Detroit. Mike Ilitch, his former father-in-law, had said that we gotta build. They built Little Caesars in Detroit, and Jim and Bob Gainey said, we're going to build hockey here. We had one ice pad in Dallas when we got there. They built rinks. They got kids invested. They got kids interested in hockey. And now there's lots. I mean, Blake Coleman's from the Dallas area. Blake Coleman, they'll tell you about being from Dallas and everything. So I think, and Bob Gainey said, if we get good athletes playing hockey, we're going to get really good hockey players. And I think that that's what we have. We've seen, and it's been more open. The Europeans have come over. Mm-hmm. And I also think the rule packages that came out of the 04-05 lockout have been really significant. You know, you now have, the game is skating. The high-end skill is always going to be the high-end skill, but the game is quick and it's fast and it gives opportunity to players that can move and play at that pace in different ways. They all play in different ways to be in the game. And I think that that's made the game really, really strong. And by extension, allowed the Vegas Golden Knights and the Seattle Kraken to field really competitive teams. The other part of that too is that after the expansions, when the new expansion teams didn't get very much to pick from, they made sure that those expansion teams paying big money to come in the league had a better pool of players to select too.
Could this league go to 34? Could it go to 36?
Jesus, you know, you're putting me on the spot now. I hate to say no, but I have a hard time saying yes. A real difficult time.
I do too. I do too, to be perfectly honest. I really do. I think this is where but if that's truly the case, if it's an expanded, market, because Quebec is likely not going to get the Arizona Coyotes because it's the wrong side of the continent, right? Mm-hmm. Is there a solution here that sees two more teams come in? Well, Quebec, I don't think is going to want to pay $1 billion expansion fee, right? That puts you in a hole early.
Yeah, well, it doesn't. It depends who's going to If you're looking at franchise values and you start to look, well, wait a second, it might be a good investment. I mean, like if you look at where owners have bought and where they bought at, and now you see franchise values where they're at. I mean, you're going to have to make a decision on what your capital investment is, and then ultimately what your return is going to be. That's true of any investment.
Right.
So my hesitation on saying yes is 34 teams, 36 teams. Do we have enough? Like, remember that when we're expanding, okay, we can spread the pool of talent around the NHL, but you're bringing up players that aren't capable of playing in the NHL right now. Mm-hmm. That dilutes your talent level.
Yep.
I'm not so sure I want to dilute the talent level. That's why I say we can talk about the economics, and I hear lots of things about, Toronto, they should put another team in Toronto. Let me be very clear on this, Rob. The Toronto Maple Leafs are never going to allow another team to come into Toronto. Ever, 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 ever. They have a monopoly there. They are not giving it up. So everybody should just stop talking about another team in Toronto. Never going to happen.
You seem adamant on that point. One last one before we let you go to dazzle an entire nation on television, which is what you do. And that has to do with, because I loved you and I never ever forget this. One of the greatest hockey moments of my life. You and I sat and watched an American Hockey League game up at Edmonton during the lockout, and we sat there and we talked about players. And I always think about our conversation. What happened to Matt Tkachuk in 12 months? Because the Matt Tkachuk who scored the overtime goal last night was not the same Matt Tkachuk who bowed out in 5 games with his teammates against Edmonton in the second round last year.
He was hurt, number one. I mean, he had, the laceration,
right? Yeah.
But he had the laceration from the first series. He was able to recover from it, but then he had a hand injury. And when your game is predicated on holding the puck, and I mean, think about how many close plays he had in and around the net against the Edmonton Oilers in that second round series that he couldn't finish on. And he had a bad hand. He had a bad hand that he was trying to fight through. And so what I would say is, I mean, he was a dominant player last year for the Calgary Flames during the regular season. Injuries become part of it and certainly can impact you in a negative way. He's not dealing with that this year. He was every bit as impactful this year for the Florida Panthers. And, I mean, obviously you end up being somebody that is that moves in a big trade and everything. And now the focus, because Florida's on to the conference final, you get, and then he scores the overtime goal. I mean, and he hadn't scored in 6 games, and now he scores a huge. I mean, the thing about Matthew is, I always say this about Matthew, and there's a lot of players that fall in this category. One thing you know about Matthew is that if he's only 75%, you're going to get 100% of his 75%. Now we can look at numbers and we can look at product and go, well, why didn't he score? Bad hand is going to affect a player like Matthew Tkachuk. And I think that can apply to different players. But you always know whatever level of health he's at, you're going to get 100% of Matthew Tkachuk. And that's what the Florida Panthers know. And I think that's what Calgary Flames saw as well. Regardless of whether he was 75% healthy or 100% healthy.
Well, we always get 100% of you, and I'm proud to tell you that you've risen again in my charts of buttons. You're now my favorite button. Your wife drops to 2, Todd drops to 3. So this was amazing. It was so good to get you back on the Cool Button podcast. Of course, we want everybody to watch that. You're on TSN. My hope is that you'll come back and do this one more time at some point.
No, I'll do that any time with you, and I'm just down the street from you, so I can come up to the new. But you know what, Rob, you can talk to me. I'm glad you're keeping me up. My eldest daughter is going to have her first child at the end of November. Oh. We're going to be grandparents. So in my house, I just slipped. The reason I love dogs. The reason I never got a dog was I would just slip behind the dog. Yeah. Well, with a grandchild coming, I'm just slipping down the roster. So the fact that you've kept me up near the top, it's based on past history, but I'll take it.
All right. It's based on today. It's based on today. Craig, as always, appreciate this. We'll talk soon. Ooh, that was harsh. And he's gone, but he's got to jump. He's going on to TS. He texted me earlier. Of course, I'm the one that gives everybody the wrong email, but I had the number right. And he texted me earlier and said, hey, I got to jump off a little early because I got to do TSN. No kidding. Kyle Dubas. And this is why I love this part. This is the show. Like this is the stuff. Ty, are you listening? Nah, let's stay with stuff. This is the stuff I love because I bring Craig on and I'm adamant that you can't tell me that Kyle Dubas was honest on Monday and Friday. They're letting him go because he was honest. No, Craig puts it in perspective. No. If we need you okay. Yes. And context matters, right? And everything is not black and white. Everything is not black and white. So we just, Jack, I need you again. Eric, we were hoping to get in studio, but as just because he's writing on deadline because of Dubas too. Can we send him a Zoom link, please? You still have his email? Okay. Check with Gav. He might have his email, but we were hoping to have him in studio, but he, of course, too, is writing. But, the same thing about, Tkachuk and ding, ding, ding. This is why you bring smarter people on. Like you don't get smarter by, bringing on people who are, perfect. We'll get him on. Yeah. So it, as expected, it was the Shanahan press conference. So we fully appreciate that. So we'll get him on when we can. My point being is, it's funny. The internet's a crazy place, right? So we put out the highlights of the show, and I say something, and people who don't listen to the show or don't watch the show or don't have the context react to that or whatever. And you're this, you're that. I never said I'm an expert. I'm not an expert. I'm not an insider. I tell you great stories about me and Kelly Kirsch at the radio station in 960 and long drawn out conversations about insiders. And I've never been an insider. I really haven't. What Elliot does, what Chris Johnson does, what Frank does, what these guys do is incredible. The amount of work they put into it. That's never been my thing. My thing is about asking questions. And I'm, never comfortable when somebody says, oh, I agree with everything you say. Oh, please don't say that. Please don't say that. Please never say that. All I would ask is that every once in a while, hold on. We're just, no problem. I'm just, he's going to do it Zoom. I just didn't know if we're going to lose him or we're all good. Okay. But it's that kind of day, right? Like, the Dubas stuff changes a whole lot of things. Oh, there's another one. I'm all pissy because, my friend Brad Treliving can't go and apply for a job. There's Craig Button, black and white. You sign it, you don't like it. Yeah, well, you know what? You're not wrong. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. That's why I like having Craig. That's why I like having Eric on and Pete on. And I like having you guys around too. You're not bad either. One day we're going to do a real cool professional show. This is not that day, but one day. By the way, you heard it from Craig Button, my favorite Button. No disrespect, Kara, his wife, or Todd Button. I like Todd too, but today Craig is my favorite. Ski Cellar Snowboard. Craig could have bought skis in Switzerland, chose not to. Where's he going to go? Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. There you go. That's all you need to know. We are broadcasting today live from from the Treaty 7 territory. I was going to say that wrong too. Everybody is welcome. This is an all-inclusive podcast. You are safe here. We are glad you're here. A little frustrated that for some reason we still feel like in politics we need to make villains out of a community, which did not go unnoticed this week, which is really disappointing that we're there. But that's why we are allies, right? That's why we promote our allyship so that people know where we stand. Calgary in Scottsdale. It's not Scottsdale. It's Coachella Valley in the desert. It's Palm Springs, so it's not exactly next to Scottsdale. 1-0 win. Cole Schwint with a game winner on Wednesday. Dustin Wolf with the shutout when they needed it the most. Now for all the marbles. Is there anything better than a game 5 in a 5-game series, game 7 in a 7-game series, or game 9 in a 9-game series? No, I don't think there is. And you can follow along tonight. Sandra Persina is calling it on the radio. Again, really excited for her. She's done an outstanding job this year. Speaking of guys who did outstanding jobs, just a little love for my dear friend Chris Johnson and Julian McKenzie, who I have yet to actually spend any time with and meet, follow and listen to on the podcast with CJ. But if you didn't, that's a good listen. Like yesterday's podcast was one of the best hockey podcasts I've heard in a long time. Just really raw, and it had a lot of local content, but I respect the hell out of Chris Johnson because I know the work he puts in, and you can tell it's rubbing off because Julian McKenzie's a heck of a young reporter, and he's put in his time in Montreal and he's done his things. And Salim was in here on Wednesday with Danny Austin. There's as much as I bitch and moan about how the business is eroding, there's some really good young writers and young broadcasters and stuff like that. That's the cool part. But back to CJ's podcast and with Julian, it's worth a listen. If you just the vantage point, I think sometimes I say something or somebody else in Calgary says something. It's easy to kind of go, well, is it sour grapes? You used to be there, you're not there anymore. And that's fair. I mean, I try to be as upfront and honest about, where I'm coming from and what my life experiences are. But when somebody like CJ jumps in I just thought it was an excellent podcast. So a little love that way to our friends out there. Dallas and the Vegas Golden Knights coming up tonight as the Western Conference Final continues. Just a series matchup board here, just to take a look at how close they are. Obviously, this one is staggering to me. It's not obviously, it's staggering. Look at the 5-on-5 goals against for Dallas versus Vegas. And the thing that, and now, Gab, this is not me running at your favorite club, so don't all of a sudden pull the plug on the show. It's staggering to me that Vegas comes through a long series with the Edmonton Oilers and has only given up 15 goals against 5-on-5. Like, that is staggering to me. And here are your goaltenders tonight. Jake Ottinger, who nearly stole that series last year in the first round against Calgary. He's been just average. And then there's Aiden Hill at the other side, who what he's done this year is his career numbers in the NHL in the playoffs. And they're really, really good. He, again, is, to me, like that Edmonton Oilers team is a handful. Those two players are a handful, and there's some guys behind them that are Zach Hyman and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and I'm not dissecting the Oilers season or anything like that. I'm just really impressed with what Vegas was able to do defensively. The power play for the Oilers was almost a gimme, right? Like if they got a power play, they were getting a goal. Not quite, but very close to that. And yet Vegas somehow managed to survive all of that with really good numbers. I just don't trust Dallas not to find another gear, if that makes sense. I just don't trust Jake Ottinger, that what we've seen from Jake Ottinger is Jake Ottinger. He's had his moments, he's had his flashes, and a lot was made about the scouting that Seattle had done on him. A lot was made about, whether or not Seattle exposed him. It reminds me of the Corey Crawford can't catch stuff. One year when the Blackhawks were rolling to a Stanley Cup, Corey Crawford can't catch. I can't even remember who they were playing, but their video coach, they found out they can't catch, and that became a storyline. Hell, you want to? Retro was on the Barn Burner today. They were talking about, I believe it's the anniversary now of Game 6, the win over the Sharks, or maybe it was just Game 2. I can't remember, but they were talking about the San Jose series, and I go all the way back to the Vancouver series in 2004, when Dan Cloutier can't go, and they turned to Johan Hedberg. And the whole storyline out of the Vancouver media was, it's Johan Hedberg is going to change this series. His ability to handle the puck will completely change this series. All tips in favor of the Vancouver Canucks, and the Flames go out and beat the hell out of Johan Hedberg, and he's done, and Alex Auld comes in, and the rest of, as they say, is history. So a lot was made about, Jake Ottinger in that Seattle series, whether or not the Kraken had, figured him out. So we'll see. Vegas got a good coaching staff, so they've watched everything. They've gone back. Where was the success for Seattle? Where was the success? Minnesota had against Dallas. They're going to do that same thing. I just think Jake Ottinger's young, but thoroughbred, and has the ability to bounce back. And if he bounces back, he's going to make life very difficult for the Golden Knights. Jack Eichel's rolling now. I'm kind of happy for Jack. Here's a young guy that had the unfortunate luck of being number 2 behind Connor McDavid. Any other draft, and he'd probably be a first overall. But, and I don't want to speak for Buffalo fans. I don't want to speak for the Buffalo media or anything like that. It just always felt that his time in Buffalo was what could have been, what might have been, but was Jack instead. And then the injury, and that whole, how dare you go against our doctors, and that, and choosing to go down his path. And that's created a whole controversy about whether or not you have the right as a professional athlete to seek your own health care and treatment. And, the eventual trade, which the Calgary Flames were in right until the end. And it's funny. At one point, Matt Tkachuk was involved in a trade there. His name had popped up. And I don't know. I have my theory that the Flames were just a stalking horse to drive up the price for Vegas or whoever else. I don't think he was ever, I think the Flames wanted him, and surely Buffalo talked about it, but he just felt like a stalking horse to me. He ends up in Vegas. He's been banged up a bit, and then this playoff has shown up. What can you say about Stone? Mark Stone's a hell of a player. I don't, it's not a matter of being a fan or whatever. Vegas, I don't know. They just rubbed me the wrong way. Right from the get-go. There was other teams that had to, go through strife and all of that. But, Craig Button talked about it. If you're bringing a team in, can they afford to wallow in the mud? So this team has just had success, almost handed to it in the way the draft worked out. They did a great job. Don't get me wrong. They buffaloed a lot of the league. They forced stuff on the league, and They went to a Stanley Cup final in their inaugural season, which is absolutely unprecedented in major sports, and have not really gone away since. Go through coaches like they go through candy, and they have no problem spending money and trading assets, and their loyalty is to a point. And when you're no longer valuable to them, Fleury coming off of Vezina, Pacioretty, goodbye, we'll move on. And that's a cutthroat way of doing business. And I got to be honest with you. If I was a season ticket holder in Vegas, maybe I wouldn't know any different, but I've been spoiled and life is good. And it should be a good series. It should really be a good series. Dallas, I guess I can't even remember. I might have picked Vegas earlier. So I'm going to go. Yeah, I might have. So I'm going to go Dallas and Carolina now. So if you go back and listen to the podcast, if you rewind the podcast, I'm pretty sure I went with Vegas and Tampa, Vegas and Florida earlier. So now I believe I've predicted most of the combinations that can happen in that series. That's exactly how invested into all of this that I am. Eric Duhatschek will join us in a couple of minutes. He did have a chance to listen to the Brendan Shanahan press conference, which Craig Button was referencing. So we're going to pick his brain on that. We will talk a little bit about the Flames general manager search. I know that Pierre LeBrun and Frank Seravalli and others have suggested that it's coming to an end. I don't have, again, told you, I'm not a... I am not an insider by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think anything's going to. Everybody's hypersensitive to a comment that Don Maloney made about having a general manager in place for the scouting meetings. And while that would be ideal, nothing says you can't push your scouting meetings, right? So you're telling me that your regional scout for New England, who has to go to a basketball tournament that his cousin's playing in the following week, is going to keep the Calgary Flames from moving? No. The timetable is when the general manager search is over. The timetable is when the appropriate candidate accepts the offer. The timetable is when you have all the pieces in place to make that announcement. Doubt very much that Peter Hanlon and his crew over at the Flames want to do anything over the long weekend. Don't expect anything here late in the afternoon. But who expected, the the announcement out of Toronto, right? It's the way it works. Gav is just letting me know that apparently Arizona now teasing a new arena. So if this tweet gets, I think they've been hacked. Gav, so this is completely legit, right? This is their account. I don't know if they can afford the $8 a month to get the blue check mark. So I'm assuming. Last night they put this out. This was their poll yesterday. Mesa, Scottsdale, Chandler, and Gilbert. And I think I was saying this before about Scottsdale. It will work in Scottsdale. It will work in Scottsdale. And I don't think, because the predominant audience for this podcast is Calgary based or around Calgary. So I think there's a lot of people that know Scottsdale really well. I love it. I've been there a couple times, hockey related, obviously. And I think it's a great community. And, the great Charlie Simmer, who I spent some time with, who worked in Arizona, that was always his point, is that, we'd go to in Glendale, and he goes, if you could just pick this arena up and put it in Scottsdale, this place would be full every day. And that was always the prevailing feeling. So, and we talked to Craig Button. We talked to Craig about, what Gary Bettman, he sent out the terse little release. The NHL wasn't happy. They were shocked and everything, but Gary Bettman never has a situation in which there isn't a plan B. And in this case, there's probably a plan B and C. Who knows? I just don't think this story is dead. I wonder, though, is this a book you would read? Is this a book? Would you read a book about the area? If you're a hockey book person, if you're a fan of hockey and you get the every year I think Bob McKenzie puts out a book at Christmas, and there's always some autobiographies. We had Bruce Dobigan on a little while ago, and Eric Duhatschuk, who will join us here momentarily from The Athletic. He's written books. Would you read a book about the saga of the Arizona Coyotes and their home and their Glendale? Or the other option, would you watch a Netflix show on it? And I'm not saying documentary. Would you watch a scripted drama about the arena situation and the life and times of the Arizona Coyotes? Would that have any interest? Is there any of that drama that would entertain you? Is there any of that you could see as exciting? Is there any of that as you could see as entertainment on any level? Because it's gone on for a long time. And it was funny when the when the results for the vote were announced earlier in the week, how quickly everybody just started rubbing their hands with glee, going, "We're moving, they're moving, they're moving." And somebody put out a tweet. Gav, did you have the tweet with the attendance? You did, didn't you? The attendance in Quebec versus there you go. So there's the attendance in Quebec City with the Ramparts in their last 4 home games, because they're going to likely win the Quebec League and move on to the Memorial Cup. And they're the last 4 games in Arizona at the school at ASU, which of course holds 4,600. So they sold all 4 out. And I'm I would love to see the Nordiques back. I don't know why, but I was always very confident that Winnipeg was going to get a team again. I was always very confident that a team, and I thought it was Arizona, to be perfectly honest. Just because of they're not going to dig their heels in for 20 years on this. Well, they have. Ended up being the Thrashers, but I was always confident, 5 years out, that Winnipeg was going to get a team. They got a team. I have never felt confident that Quebec is going to get a team. Don't mix that up with should or shouldn't. I just wasn't I'm just not confident about it. For a number of reasons, one of which just a little while ago, Mr. Button referenced, and I will reference too, is there enough there to support a club? We've had stories about the Winnipeg Jets really struggling this year, that they're really nervous about what their season ticket number might be. They're really nervous about, whether or not they can continue to create the revenue generate the revenue that they need to keep that team viable. Now, bigger arena in Quebec, no doubt about it. And the facility is superb, no doubt about it. There's a motivated owner in waiting. The gentleman who I believe is now the owner of the Montreal Alouettes would be a motivated owner in waiting, and which is exactly what happened to Mark Chipman and True North. They were owners in waiting for Winnipeg. They were told to stay out of the spotlight, just to be quiet. I don't want to say sit down, do what you're told, but Gary Bettman has a plan. It's funny, there's a movie out now about Blackberry, Jim Balsillie. He doesn't want remember Jim Balsillie in Nashville, and Jim Balsillie in Pittsburgh, and Jim Balsillie in Hamilton, and all of those sort of things. They don't want a repeat of that. So, there may be an owner in waiting in Quebec, but is there enough there? If you need to count on corporate support in that province, how much of that is going to be crippling to the Montreal Canadiens? How much of that are you going to take away from the Canadiens to prop up the Nordiques? The reality is they're billion-dollar businesses. They are. The cost to play is never been greater. Montreal at one point needed help to stay around, early 2000s. I'm not suggesting Montreal's in any trouble. That's not my point. I just don't know if there's enough there to warrant another team in Quebec right now. I hope so. I'd like to see it there. And since we're going down that path, hell, give me back the Whalers too. We didn't get into it with Craig. We'll likely get into it with Eric. The line of demarcation in all of this may be the Eastern and Western Conference, that there's not an appetite to take a team out of the West and add a team in the East and go to a unbalanced conference. Would that prevent the league from redrawing conferences? We go East-West. I'm going to say this, and a lot of you are going to react to this somewhat negatively, but could you go North-South to even things out? Probably. But the problem with North-South is it doesn't take into consideration the time zones, right? You really want your conferences and your divisions broken up relatively close by time zones. Wouldn't be the case in the North-South Conference. But is that the only way to go? I mean, is if the only thing is keeping Quebec out of the NHL right now is the fact that you don't want to go to 17 and 15, then is there another way of doing this? But let's also lay all the cards on the table. Salt Lake City, which my whole adult life was all it was an IHL team, for a long time, and now an ECHL team. I had never, there's Utah players, Trevor Lewis, I believe, not Trevor Lewis. Anyway, maybe it was. Anyway, there's players from Utah. There's hockey, minor hockey in Utah, but I was never of the opinion that Utah was a place in it. But recently, Utah and Ryan Smith, the owner of not that Ryan Smith, not even the other Ryan Smith, but the Ryan Smith, the owner of the Utah Jazz, has been approached or courted or talked to about possible ownership. Houston, which, if Calgary leaves, they're going to Houston, right? That's always been there. Houston is a desirable market in the NHL's eyes because of its television presence and the size of its television market. They have the biggest markets in television in the United States. However, I guess it's still the same with streaming. I was going to say that's more of an old school television set thing, but still population wise, Houston's a big place. Sacramento just got a new building. San Francisco. Well, no, I guess San Jose's there. So, good Lord. Now I'm putting a team in where San Jose is. It's that's and I'm thinking there's one more too, and it's not Portland because I think Portland's not it. Sacramento. Anyway, there's enough options in the West, I think, from the National Hockey League standpoint, that they don't have to, look outside and break up the conference numbers. So I believe we have our next guest. Gav, am I cool to go ahead? Okay, perfect. Of course, brought to you by Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. Speaking of, our next guest has an affinity somewhat to skiing because he came out west to cover skiing, and that's where his career really took off. And then he got into hockey, and it skyrocketed, and now he works for the Athletic. 3 locations in Calgary: McLeod Trail by Chinook Center, 17th Avenue Southwest, just off of 14th Street, Bow Ridge Road Northwest. Eric Duhatschek joining us here on this Friday afternoon. Hey, what's new? What's up? You got anything to do? Are you busy? What's going on?
Well, so you know how my Friday usually works, Rob. By 1 o'clock, I usually have my weekly NHL notes column done. I was really humming along last night even, but I was planning to do something on what's next for Toronto and Edmonton. And then, of course, this morning we found out what's next for Toronto, or at least part of what's next for Toronto. And I had a take on it. And then Brendan Shanahan had a press conference. And honestly, when you think about, like so many press conferences say so little. Mm-hmm. And this was just unbelievable, the detail about exactly what transpired from the time that Kyle Dubas did his end of season interview with the media, and then the decision that they are looking for a new general manager today. And from the public initial first statement that they had to the incredible detail that Shanahan went into, made you realize, okay, that was way messier than 3 paragraphs in a prepared statement suggests. So pull the column back and add some details, and And I think I'm done. I hope I am. Anyway, but no, I mean, completely fascinating. And what I'll tell you, because I don't think I'm jumping the gun, I should have my column posted soon, is that my first thought was that Calgary and Toronto need to trade former general managers.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, I still think that the best candidate here in Calgary is an internal one in Craig Conroy, and I've been beating the drums for him, as a lot of other people have. But if the decision is made to go outside the organization, think about what Don Maloney said in terms of what he was looking for. He wants a bright young mind. He wants someone that that will complement his vision, which is a bit more old school. And really, at the time, we weren't sure what was happening with Kyle Dubas, but I'm thinking to myself, he's talking about Kyle Dubas or someone like Kyle Dubas.
Mhm.
The difference is that Kyle Dubas has been a general manager for 5 years in Toronto. And say what you will, I know a lot of people think he did a good job. Some people think he did a poor job. If you really break it down, the decision to sign John Tavares turned out to be a disaster. If they had only just not done that one thing and saved that $11 million to accommodate all the other cap issues that came up, I think his resume is excellent, and I would be looking at hiring him. I'm sure the Islanders at some point, he succeeded Lou Lamoriello in Toronto. Could he succeed Lou Lamoriello in New York ultimately?
Yeah.
But the other part of it is that I think the way Brendan Shanahan was outlining what he wants in a general manager, he was describing Brad Treliving. He was looking for someone with experience, someone that would not shrink away from this job. I mean, I think one of the things that we all think, but a lot of Treliving's peers think as well, which is really important, because you're working with 32 general managers. He's got his fingers in every pie. He's got his eyes and ears open all the time. He has a really disarming manner with the press and the public. I think he would be perfect. Can you imagine a scenario on September 1st where Brad Treliving is running the Leafs and Kyle Dubas is the general manager in Calgary? I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility. And the one thing I would go back to too, with what Don Maloney said, was that he wants to hire the right person,
Mhm.
and if he can't get that person immediately, this decision can spill into the future. And so Don Maloney's been a general manager in the National Hockey League for a long time. I think he could easily steer the ship for a period of time, if that's what it will take to at least call Kyle Dubas and see if this is something he'd be interested in. So anyway, it's a fascinating time, because and a lot of all of this stuff, think about how things have changed in 2 weeks. Going into the second round of the playoffs, we were talking about potentially an all-Canadian final.
Yep.
Toronto was a betting favorite in the East. Edmonton was the betting favorite in the West. It didn't seem that far-fetched, and then the events of 2 weeks just shifted everything. People are really disappointed in Edmonton, and Connor McDavid is saying Stanley Cup or bust, and then then these crazy changes in Toronto today. So wow, there's never seems to be a shortage of news, Rob.
Nope, there never is. We had Craig Button on earlier, and he was only able to watch the first part of Brendan Shanahan's press conference. But I want to ask you what he brought up. At the beginning of the week, Kyle Dubas had a end of the season roundup with the media, and seemed to make some headlines by his honesty that was not. I don't think he ever used the word burned out, but wanted to talk to his family, and if it wasn't Toronto, it wasn't anywhere else.
Right.
Craig said that Brendan seemed to bring that up. What was your assessment of what happened Monday and how it influenced today?
Well, yeah, I think that one of the things that Brendan Shanahan said, and by the way, I recommend that anybody that's listening to this podcast, when they finish listening to us, they can find the Brendan Shanahan press conference pretty widely on Twitter or on the Leafs website, and it's really compelling. Like at different times, I thought, okay, I'm going to write that down. I got to write that down, but to your question, so I think that Brendan Shanahan said that what he took out of that very honest press conference was that Kyle Dubas wasn't sure if he wanted to return as the general manager of the Leafs. And then that forced him to rethink his position, which was that he was prepared to offer him extension, and they were talking about it, and they felt that they were well on the way to resolving it. And then then there's a further detail, which is that Kyle Dubas's agent presented a financial counter offer that was more than what they talked about before. And so that added a wrinkle to it. But then the first question in the press conference from our friend Chris Johnson was, so was this purely a financial decision? And the answer was no, it wasn't. It was more of a, if his commitment isn't as strong as it appeared to be a week ago, then maybe we need to rethink what we're doing. So, as I said, nuanced and shades of gray through there that make this absolutely fascinating. And the one thing that's a little bit discouraging from our perspective is that here are two people, Kyle Dubas and then Brendan Shanahan, who are basically going out and speaking their truths, which you really rarely hear. You often have to. I always joke that it's like the old Kremlinologists in the 80s and the 90s. There would be a statement from the Soviet Union, and then there would be people who would say this phrase means this, that phrase means that. You would need someone to interpret it, and a lot of NHL and professional sports teams press conferences are like that. You need somebody to read between the lines, to understand the nuances, and so I don't want to ever discourage people from saying this was a hard stretch this last little bit, and I've. They didn't say he was ignoring his family, but I think what happens is when you get into that hockey vacuum, you're just so focused on the task at hand, and important things like family sometimes become secondary and slip through the cracks. And then, then the season is over and you turn around and your kids have grown and you're just, you're basically reintroducing yourself there. And, and that's a big part of life, right? I always say family and health are the two most important things, and then everything else, they're important, but those are the most important things. And that's what I heard from Kyle Dubas there. And I believe that too. So I don't really have a problem with anyone saying that. So, but we can analyze to death how both of those teams got to where they were, and would there have been ways of having Brad Treliving continue in Calgary and Kyle Dubas in Toronto? Maybe, but here's the reality: both teams are looking for new general managers, and the two men that we're speaking of, I think, are both really good at what they do. And it'd be a fascinating thing if they switch portfolios, and that's the whole point. Rob, we trade players all the time, right? We trade players hypothetically. Teams trade players. I've joked over the years, of all the years that I've writing, teams should trade coaches. In many ways, that happened this year. If you look at just the Final Four in the National Hockey League right now, Peter DeBoer is coaching against his former team, and Bruce Cassidy left Boston, and Jim Montgomery went there. So so a three-way coaching swap. Two teams are still playing for a championship, and the other coached the Bruins to the best regular season in history. So, a de facto coaching swap that worked out for all three teams. So now I think we need to start talking about that in terms of general managers. So that's what I'm proposing, that the teams just turn the page and Brad Treliving takes over the Leafs, and Kyle Dubas comes in here and works with Don Maloney and the group that they have, and let's see how they resolve that.
What about the report by Pierre LeBrun and I believe Frank Seravalli that the Flames aren't allowing Brad Treliving to interview for jobs? And as Craig Button pointed out, you sign a deal, you sign a deal. Would the Maple Leafs be patient?
Well, I think that they could circle back to the Flames and ask for that same permission. And if they're told that they can't, that complicates things enormously, because they have some personnel decisions to make ahead of July the 1st in terms of no trade clauses that kick in. So that would complicate things. But Yeah, I mean, I understand, Craig's position on that. The one thing that I would say is that it seems a bit spiteful to me to deny, Brad Treliving permission to find a job elsewhere. It was framed as a mutual agreement. Doesn't sound very mutual when the Flames deny him permission to talk to a team that has a general manager's opening. If you're the Calgary Flames, what you have to hope in the macro picture is to create a good work environment and to become a destination around the National Hockey League. And lots of times over the years that they've operated here, they have been that. They had great teams in the 80s. The ownership there with Harley Hotchkiss and Doc Seaman were, players still talked about the familial feeling of the organization then. And, there are a lot of strikes against small market teams in Canada, especially as, a team like Calgary that's operating in a building that doesn't have the same amenities that, say, Edmonton has. So what you want to do is create this impression that we are a welcoming organization. We are an organization that wants you to play here, and we will show you why. And so I think it just sends the wrong message if you're denying your former general manager, an opportunity to seek employment elsewhere. People around the National Hockey League are, friends of Brad Treliving's. They look at that and say, do I want to work for an organization that would do something like that? So, they're of course they're within their rights to do that. And
Sure.
you can hold everyone to your contract, or you can simply say, we have parted ways, and God bless, good luck, in where you go next, and we're turning our attention to our future. That's the pragmatic, middle of the road way to do things. And certainly that would be, if you put me in charge, Rob, that's how I would do it. You want to put me in charge?
I do want to put you in charge. I would let you do it. One last one about, and it's not really about Toronto, but it kind of is. And I hate to, I don't really like to take runs at other people in the media, but Eric, this storyline after Dubas's press conference on Monday and up to today was, if the Maple Leafs want to keep Auston Matthews, they've got to keep Kyle Dubas, because Kyle Dubas has a good relationship with Auston Matthews. I do find that a little bit tough to swallow. Or am I wrong about that? I mean,
No,
is it?
You're 100% right. No,
Yeah.
no. I mean, obviously, it's a good thing. It's a good thing that Kyle has a relationship with Matthews, and through Matthews' agent, Judd Moldaver, who is going to negotiate this contract extension. I think people do lose sight of the fact that even though they are eligible to sign a contract extension on July 1st, it doesn't mean that you have to sign a contract extension on July 1st. You have 12 months to do it. You can do it at any point during the summer. But the reality is that the relationship between the general manager of the team and the star player of the team is arm's length. I mean, you have to have a much better relationship with a coach, because the coach is in your ear on a daily basis. But the GMs don't check in with the players except for a handful of times. Everything okay? Any way I can help? So if there's somebody else running the ship, you probably want to know what the vision of that general manager is, but that vision is articulated in the layer above that. That's Brendan Shanahan's vision that the general manager is going to implement. And so I just don't think it's that important. I think that whoever gets that job in Toronto next is going to do the same thing that Kyle Dubas would have done, which is, we want Auston Matthews to stay. Auston Matthews has publicly said he wants to stay. We should be able to find a way of making this work. Here are the comparable dollars. Here are the options. You can go short term, medium term, long term. You can do the whole 8 years. I think there are, the other complication this week, of course, is that whole notion of what happens with the Arizona Coyotes.
Yep.
Because I think there were people that thought that there was a chance that Auston Matthews might take, a 3 to 5 year contract with the Leafs, because then that gives you a chance to potentially win during the window that they're in right now. And then if he wants to sign another contract and potentially go home, and if by then they have a new building in Arizona, and if they have a team in Arizona, then he could then, 3 to 5 years from now, he's still, a guy that might go home. So now, of course, after the news out of Tempe, where the various proposals that were made in that voter referendum were all turned down, the Coyotes are back to square one in terms of either finding a permanent home in the Phoenix metropolitan area or potentially looking at relocation scenarios. So that would be another reason why, with the uncertainty there, that Austin Matthews would be prepared to commit to Toronto, at least in the short to medium term. So, and I don't think it matters who hands the contract over or who's negotiating it. If he wants to stay, the numbers are going to be the numbers, and that can be resolved. It shouldn't be that complicated.
Do you care to opine at all about the Arizona Coyotes? I thought of you because it was only a month or 6 weeks ago you wrote the, expansion article about possible cities, and where they could go. And it was funny because as that story broke, that was really the first thing, right? Like, where are they going to go? They're going to leave. Gary Bettman has to have a plan.
Yeah.
I can't believe the fight's over. Maybe it is, but I can't believe it's over yet.
So my column right off of that event, because I was asked to do a column right off of that, because you're right, everybody else did the, here's where the team will go next, and here are the options, and all of us know who the Houston is the best option from a National Hockey League point of view. It's a rival for Dallas. The team could compete in the Central Division. Possibly Salt Lake City, possibly Kansas City. But I wrote exactly that on Wednesday morning, I guess it was, or Tuesday morning. I get my days mixed up because everything is such a blur. But my contention was just what you said, which is that Gary Bettman has spent 27 years of his 30 years as the NHL commissioner propping up this franchise, and I made the point, because this is true, that in the early days of the franchise, when they were playing at America West Arena downtown, the place was lively, it was packed, it was a great atmosphere. Phoenix did look like a hockey town, as inconceivable as that might have seemed to a lot of people. It was catching on. The problem, of course, with the building was that it was a basketball. The configuration was for a basketball team. That whole one side of the rink was obstructed view seats. So those are premium seats in a hockey arena that they can't sell because you can't see the goal net below you. And so it was not the right place for the team. They needed a hockey only or a hockey mainly building. And ultimately they decided to go out to Glendale, and that has been a disaster from the word go. And I'll preface that by saying I loved going to Glendale for games, but that's because I stayed at that Renaissance Hotel right beside the arena, and that and you have that entertainment district right there. There was a Yard House where you could get a beer after the game. There was a Jimmy Buffett store there where you could buy Jimmy Buffett t-shirts. I mean, it was fantastic, but it wasn't if you were living in Scottsdale and had to take the ring road to the games because the traffic was so bad. And then, at the end of the game's over at 11 or whatever, and it's 3/4 of an hour on a dark highway to get back home. And it just the geography of it defeated it. So I've always maintained that in the right place, that market can survive. And yet Tempe seemed like the right place. So if that had gone forward, I think a lot of people would have been happy that the soap opera or the drama was over, and shovels in the ground after the land had been remediated, and if they have a new building, the timing of the rebuild would probably coincide with going into the new building, and it would be, everybody would live happily ever after. But that doesn't seem to be the case. But to get back to your original point, I think there was always like a plan B and a plan C that they didn't want to state publicly because they were hoping that plan A would go forward. Well, now that plan A didn't go forward, they're going to continue to look at ways of keeping the team there for a lot of reasons, including the fact that they don't want to lose the market. They've invested so much time in the market. And B, when they finally get around to expanding the NHL again, the 33rd and the 34th teams will pay $1 billion each to get into the league. And if you take Houston away because you're relocating Phoenix, that's $1 billion out of your coffers, which you don't have to share with the players. So that's a big deal there too. So I don't know. I mean, I and they have, since that column was posted, they have publicly announced that they'll play in the Mullet Arena for at least one more year, and then see what their contingency plans are. The downtown building, which has been renamed, is now not, it's just not an option for hockey anymore. I can't see them going back to Glendale. There's a few other options, presumably, but you could also, maybe get different investors in there with different plans and proposals, all of which will be probably done behind the scenes. And at some point, maybe in 2 or 3 months, there will be another pitch similar to the one in Tempe for a new building, and so on and so forth. So we're not at the end of the road yet for Arizona, for sure.
As a story and as an author and someone who's written books before, is this a good drama? Would this make a good book, or is it exhausting?
That's well framed as a question, because I a book, it probably wouldn't be a good book. I think it would be a daytime soap opera for sure. Because
that's an option too.
Well, because there's always these twists and turns, and at the end of an episode there's always like a cliffhanger, and that's what seems to have been the case to either that or I mean, you could potentially have a drama modeled on Succession if you went through all of the different ownership groups,
right,
beginning with Richard Burke buying the team. At the time, I mean, I had to refresh my memory on this, but I went back and looked at some of the things that I'd written, and I'd forgotten that the original plan was to take that team and put it into Minnesota, because Minnesota had lost the team to Dallas, and they originally wanted to go in there. This is before the Wild got an expansion franchise, and that didn't work out. And so then they went to Phoenix, but Phoenix was a B plan to the original ownership group who bought the team from Barry Shenkarow in Winnipeg. And then, and then Richard Burke eventually, handed the team over to Steve Ellman, and Steve Ellman knocked on Wayne Gretzky's door and gave him a minority stake in the team to come in and coach. And I think they felt that his presence would create interest in the team, which it did. And then it went from there. The Jim Balsillie saga, trying to move the team to Hamilton, the league stepping in to block that with the help of a favorable court ruling. Then Gary Bettman, the de facto CEO, because the league was running the team when Jerry Moyes put it into bankruptcy. And then, then they eventually found new ownership, and then that didn't work out. And then they have the current ownership. And so I think the way you described it, exhausting, is a really good way of describing it. Would somebody watch something as exhausting as that? It depends on the actors, I suppose, playing the roles of those various owners, because every one of them had some quirks and eccentricities. So, and especially if you wanted to fictionalize a few things, although you probably wouldn't have to fictionalize much, but yes, I don't know, a book, put it this way, I wouldn't want to tackle
it. Well, that's all I want to know. They are still playing games. We will see the Western Conference kickoff tonight. That's where I want to kind of go with you. I was saying it before. I don't think we've seen. I just don't believe this is Jake Ottinger. I think there's another. We've seen that level last year in the playoffs. He hasn't been consistent. Having said that, on the other side, there's a really cool story about Aiden Hill. I was looking at the comparables. We put up the comparables earlier. The one thing that really does work in favor of Vegas, though, Eric, is their 5-on-5 defense has been a lot better than Dallas's so far.
Yeah. I mean, we have to make picks, and I sat there and stared at it. And part of the problem with making picks in this year's playoffs is that if you focus too much on the goaltending matchup, you always got it wrong, right? You always got it wrong, because Connor Hellebuck was supposed to be to give Winnipeg an edge, and he didn't. And Vasilevsky was supposed to give Tampa an edge, and he didn't. And so, you think about, these goaltenders with the bulletproof resumes and the, either the Vezina Trophy nominations or the Stanley Cups on their resume, and they were playing against much lesser lights, and they were defeated anyway. And so that tells me that, to your point, that the way teams play in front of goaltenders is as important as the saves they make. And I always go back to, goaltenders on the really good teams where good is good enough. And I think that's what we've seen in these playoffs. I mean, think about it. We're watching all these broadcasts. There's all these different betting sites and different betting propositions than you can make. Well, if someone had said to you that with 4 teams remaining, the featured goaltenders would be Bobrovsky, Freddie Anderson, Adin Hill, and Jake Ottinger. Can you imagine, the odds of something like that? It would have to be like, picking the Final Four in NCAA basketball this year. Bobrovsky started on the bench because Alex Lyon had taken over the job. Ranto was the goaltender in the first game for Carolina. Vegas had Laurent Brossoit, and Ottinger would be maybe the one guy that you could see that being there at the start. But the other 3, no chance. I mean, Bobrovsky didn't have a good year. They wouldn't have made the playoffs if Alex Lyon hadn't come in and played so well down the stretch. Freddie Anderson, just, love him, but he seems to get hurt all the time, and he gets hurt at the most inopportune times, or he gets sick in the most inopportune times. And so you just don't feel that you can ever trust him. And Vegas has been a circus with all of the goaltenders that they've used this year, including the one that they didn't at the start of the year, Robin Leonard. And the fact that they've settled on Adin Hill here is remarkable. A great story, and I do think that, other people have pointed this out, but I agree with this, that, Sean Burke is probably the best goalie whisperer in the NHL. I go back to, how he turned Ilya Brizgalov around. I mean, he turned him into an all-star. And then he goes to Philadelphia, and no Sean Burke, and he's out of the league in 1 to 2 years. So I just think he speaks the language of goaltenders. He doesn't try to change their technique too much, but he has historically helped one goaltender after another find their best games. And so I think that's part of what's happened there. So I do think that the way Vegas defends in front of Hill and the number of low danger chances that they give up compared to high danger chances means that if you are good enough, and Hill has been that since he's come in relief of Laurent Brossoit, that it almost feels like the goaltending is a wash. Now, if Ottinger gets to the level that he was at in the Calgary series, then the goaltending isn't a wash. Yep. Then it's heavily favored in Dallas's direction. And that's the one thing about starting a fresh round, is it gives everybody a reset, right? So Ottinger hasn't had the best playoffs so far, and he certainly didn't have the best round against Seattle. But now you've got a fresh best of 7, so you suddenly have a margin of error that you might not have had at the end of the last series. Yep. And if he comes back and just plays, well, as I say, the way we saw him play last year, it wouldn't surprise me if, a month from now they're lifting the Stanley Cup, because that is the one place on paper that Dallas is way better than everybody else on paper.
Last night we saw 4 extra periods. Why not? So nice. We'll play twice. What's the longest game you ever covered?
Boy, that's a good question, Rob. I was looking at those lists of the 4 overtime games, and I don't believe I ever had a 4 overtime game. The longest ones I always measure it in terms of, I used to be in the newspaper business, and can you get a story in on deadline? Because in those days, if you missed a newspaper deadline, if they started printing the newspaper, there was no website to spill the story onto. You were writing for the next day. So I do remember Buffalo, Dallas, that final in the crease goal to decide 1999 Stanley Cup final. That was really difficult because it was a it was in overtime. It was the deciding game, and then it was a controversy, and
Yep.
so that one felt endless. And then the year that the Flames were eliminated in 1990 in the playoffs against Los Angeles, where Krushelnyski's shot is fluttering up and Mike Vernon is reaching back, and if he was 3 inches taller, he probably catches the thing, but it goes in the net. And the Flames are accusing Denny Morel of cheating, and that one for sure. Alan Mackey and I are sitting there in the press room in Los Angeles, and 2:18 in the morning, and we're done. There was no way to get that in. But it's obviously it's an ordeal for anybody that has to sit there and write and watch, but it's 10 times the ordeal for players, and that's actually something that I touched on in today's column too, because the one thing that I give both Carolina and Florida credit is that they made goaltending switches in these playoffs, and that's not something that old school thinkers would have ever thought possible. The old school rule of thumb was that you made sure that your starting goaltender had enough rest during the regular season so that he was fresh for the playoffs. But then once the playoffs started, it was his job for 2 months, and you only make a change if there's an injury. And so Carolina and Florida both made changes for strategic reasons, and they both paid off. And so you go into game 2 and you have 2 goaltenders, Bobrovsky and Anderson, both of whom can be injury prone, both of whom are a little bit older, and you just simply give them the night off because you do have a trusted option in Ranta and Lyon. And then that allows your goaltenders who played 2 games plus a chance to to just freshen up again. And that's not an easy decision, because it's probably easier for Paul Maurice because he has a 1-0 lead, and they won that game on the road. And if he comes back with Alex Lyon and they happen to steal it, now you go back and you're up 2-0, you're in control really. And if you lose that game, then at least you have a fresh Sergei Bobrovsky at home for game 3. Harder if you're Rod Brind'Amour, but he may do it. He may do it, because I do think that there's a physical toll on those players. And the other thing that I remember is that often after a really long playoff game like that, that's so exciting and so dramatic, and then everybody goes to the well, the next game is very flat.
Yep.
There's just no energy. That they're trying, but they just can't summon it up again that quickly in that short period of time. And I do expect that that's what will happen in game 2. It just won't be nearly the spectacle that we saw last night.
Yeah, it's funny. I thought a little bit last night, and I'm not sure it was the same length, but because we just lost him, was Peter Klima, and the famous story about being.
Well, I was in that one too.
Oh yeah, okay.
I was at that one too. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Right.
Well, and I think, wasn't that the night that the lights went out?
The lights went out. Wasn't there? Or was fog in that series too? Right.
Yeah, I know. I mean, they all kind of, that was the thing. They all kind of blur. But I was asked to do the obituary on Peter Klima, and I think it was partly because I said, I was at that game, and again, here was a guy, Peter Klima, who was like this unbelievable offensive player who wouldn't check his hat and frustrated an endless number of coaches. And so, and it was John Muckler who was running the Oilers at the time. And he stapled him to the bench because, in a game where one mistake costs you at your end, he just felt that it was too risky to play him. Well, at a certain point, nobody has any legs at all, and they're just dragging their way back to the bench. And you've got a guy there who's a skilled offensive player, and you need a goal, and he's fresh, and you put him out there, and wouldn't you know it, he scores the winning goal. So that was brilliant. But also, that's what maybe you should have put him out a period before that. I don't know, but but those games, they are, they're the stuff of legend. When we were reflecting back on the career of Peter Klima, we all seized on that particular moment and what that meant for, really the Oilers, because that was, the springboard to winning the that 5th Stanley Cup in 7 years and cementing their legacy as a dynasty. So those are all, when you reflect back on all of the games you covered and seen, that was certainly one that stands out.
Speaking of standing out, before I let you go, it has nothing to do with anything other than the two things, and it came up again this week in a couple of different conversations. The two things that I often get asked about from the previous life in this business was Craig Conroy's phone call at 2:30 in the morning after Game 7 against Vancouver in Round 1 in 2004, and Eric Duhatschek's top 50 concerts. And I had somebody ask me this week if we were planning on doing something else. So I guess I'm asking because still to this day I get people coming up. Is there anything with this format that we'd like to do? Because people really dug that, Eric. People really enjoyed that. And was that about 10 years ago now or so? Or?
Well, I can tell you exactly when it was. So it was my top 60 concerts.
Top 60, okay.
The year that I turned 60.
Okay.
So 7.5 years ago.
Okay.
And I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen that many concerts since then. Again, the pandemic really cut into the concert viewing thing. I do remember one of the great shows that I've seen since then was Fleetwood Mac at the Saddle Dome, the third rescheduled time.
Yep.
And I think I had tickets for the first one and returned them, and then when the second one was scheduled, I think I was away and I wasn't going to be able to go, and then that one was canceled, and so they came back, and it was November of 2019, and I was able to get 11th or 12th row on the floor, and I'd seen them on the Rumors tour in Edmonton in the 70s, and they were fantastic. Christine McVie, of course, was still alive then, so being able to see her and Stevie Nicks, and Lindsey Buckingham wasn't touring with the band, but Mike Campbell from the Heartbreakers was there, and then he was tremendous, and it was a great show. And but yes, if you want to talk about music, here's what I propose. At some point the hockey season will end.
Yep.
And maybe if you want to some point in July and August to just drift into a music thing, I'll happily talk about it. I'll talk about it for hours if you want, because we can talk about those concerts that I've seen, other ones that I wish I'd seen. That was one of the questions that I've been asked. Who would you have liked to have seen that you haven't already seen? And I keep changing. It's hard to come up with one. Like my first answer was always Bob Marley and the Wailers, because when James Miritich and I were roommates together. James was the former music critic of the Albertan and the Herald, and we went to journalism school together in the late 70s. I remember when Uprising arrived, because James would get all the records for free, and that was, the final cut on the second side was Redemption Song, and it just blew us away. And then, and it wasn't really a hit, or eventually it became a hit.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most enduring songs from his legacy. And it's funny, flying back from California yesterday, I was listening to a live Bob Marley concert. I think it was his final live show in Pittsburgh. And brilliant, just absolutely brilliant. I was in the mood to listen to reggae music. So for sure, if either I could go back in time or we could bring Bob Marley back, that would be a show that I'd like to see. But one of my favorite bands from the 60s were the Kinks. And by the time I was old enough to potentially see them, especially that original lineup that included Ray and Dave Davies, they just never seemed to be where I was. And I always thought they were one of the great underrated bands. And if you take the top 10 songs by them, or what I would say is my 10 favorite, I might like the 10 Kinks songs more than my favorite 10 Beatles songs, maybe more than my favorite 10 Rolling Stones songs. So, and of course, I bring the perspective of someone who was starting to listen to music in 1965. So I go back a long way, while I try to stay current, I'm finding it harder and harder all the time to find music that resonates with me. So, but yes, if you want to have a music conversation,
I do.
Rob,
we still
absolutely. Let's do
it. Twice in the last week, different people have brought it up, and I remember at the station, I just, the couple people like, "You're doing what?" And then I just remember the feedback we got from. I had to stay in my car and listen to the end. I needed to know what number one was and things like that, and it was hard not to think about you a couple weeks ago when we lost Gordon Lightfoot.
Well,
because
That was a tough day, boy. That was a tough day. In fact, that's funny. Jeff Merrick had tweeted out something about, send your reminiscences of Lightfoot. So I did. I sent him a direct message on Twitter, and then he sent me a note back saying, "Can I read this on the air?" And I said, "Of course, no problem." And he had Gordon Lightfoot's drummer on his show, and yeah, so we talked about seeing, him live for the very first performance of the record, the Edmund Fitzgerald, which I did in 1976 because I was living in Toronto at the time and used to go to those Massey Hall residences all the time. And Gordon Lightfoot is the one artist that I've seen more than any others. I think I was trying to count at least 20 times, all different stages of his career. I think that the latter part of his catalog, it gets unfairly ignored. Honestly, when I pull out my Lightfoot records on Saturday morning, it's often, A Painter Passes Through or Harmony. Those are the albums that I reach for more than Sundown or or some of the older ones. So yeah, that was a really tough day because you always sort of reflect back on what his music means to you and who you were at the time that you were listening to these songs. And yeah, it was extraordinary. The one thing I would say, I mean, if people haven't done it yet, there is an unbelievable Gordon Lightfoot concert on YouTube that he recorded as a very young artist at the BBC. And if you just type in Gordon Lightfoot BBC, it'll come up on YouTube. And I watched it the night that he passed away. Again, I've seen it multiple times, and it's just unbelievably moving, and he covers some really interesting things. Like he covers Farewell to Nova Scotia, and it's just so bouncy and wonderful. So yeah, we already spent a lot of time.
I know. Well, I was just going to say, I was asking you before about, what would make a good book. And some of it we might have to retell, but I love the story about the ABBA press conference in Edmonton.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's ABBA having a press conference in Edmonton, right? Like
and it was the very first North American concert they ever did. So they didn't tour in North America until 1979, I think it was. And, they'd made appearances on talk shows and so on and so forth. But the first ever, stadium tour or arena tour was then. And again, I was accredited as a photographer. I still have a picture. I can bring it in next time I see of Agnetha and Anna Frida that I shot from the photographer's pit in 1979 at Northlands, because James was there reviewing the concert. And in those days, reporters also doubled as photographers. And that's so I used to shoot ski racing and concerts. Those are the only two things I ever shot. So
I love it. All right. Well, we'll do that in the off season. Who knows when we meet 2 weeks from now, what the topics will be and who will be employed and who won't be. But I appreciate you joining us on what has turned out to be a very hectic day.
All right. It's always my pleasure, Rob.
All right, buddy. Eric Duhatschek, everybody from The Athletic. We will do that. We'll bring Eric in and we'll do another music show. And it's swear to God, those are the two that come up all the time. People ask about Craig Conroy's call in the after Game 7 in 2004, and they talk about Eric Duhatschek's 60 concerts, top 60. And I remember going to Kelly Kirsch and saying, I want to do this on the radio. And he's like, well, and I said, come on, just let me try. So we recorded it. And then we replayed it as around Christmas and stuff like that. And it was just phenomenal. At that time, I think people were accepting. And I think, it wasn't for everybody, but for those who enjoyed it, really enjoyed it. And we'll do something like that again. So, of course, Eric, we mentioned, came. He just talked about it. He used to be a photographer when he was covering skiing as well. Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com, 76 years in Calgary. Believe that? 76 years. And Craig Button said, I could have bought skis in Switzerland. I'm going to buy them here in Calgary. 3 locations: McLeod Trail by Chinook Center, 17th Avenue Southwest, Bow Ridge Road in the Northwest. Let's wrap it up. It's been a busy day. Kyle Dubas, no longer the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Obviously, that'll have large repercussions across the National Hockey League. The Flames expected to name a general manager rather soon. Not that I'm threatening anybody, but it better be Conroy. If it's not Conroy, it better be Pascal. And if it's not those two, then it better be Eric Duhatschek, who just said, he'd take the job. So there you go. Final mile for you. Actually, quite a bit to talk about. We are 8 days away and I say that actually, I'm going to have to say this for all three of the things that I'm bringing up in the final mile. I am connected to them. I am, this is what I do, but it's important for me to do it anyway. But just so you know, it's coming from me, and I do have ties to all three stories. 1 week, 8 days away from the Calgary Surge and the Canadian Elite Basketball League tipping off at Winsport. 90% sold out. Looks like the home opener is going to be sold out. Really excited to see the response and really excited to see how people are going to enjoy. The roster is pretty cool. Two guys with experience in the NBA. I believe a half dozen guys with experience in the G League and pro leagues. It's going to be a great caliber of basketball, but more excited to see how it all comes together because the way that it's being set up, the intersection of sport, community, art, and culture. There's some things we're going to try and I hope it all works. Some might fail, but some of it's going to work really cool. So I'm excited about that. Riley Budd. I normally just avoid elite sports and elite young athletes because I think, there's too much and just let them be kids sort of thing. And I worry more about the grassroots, but I want to acknowledge Riley Budd, who was named Hockey Alberta's Player of the Year. The reason I want to acknowledge this young man from Calgary is his work with our superheroes program. And he was part of a team that we played a couple years ago. They came out and played our kids so our kids could have a game experience. And he kind of fell in love with what the program was all about, helping our goaltenders. He raised $5,000. Riley Budd, the Hockey Alberta's Player of the Year, in the I believe they call it the Alberta Elite Hockey League now. He raised $5,000 so our kids could go to Ottawa. Brett Sutter helped out as well, but in particular, he helped out our goalies. And so not only is he great on the ice, but he gets it at such a young age. And I've had the chance to see the work that he's done and the influence he's had. So congratulations to Riley. I'm going to leave you today. I started off this journey with you on the Nation Network back in February. And right out of the gate, my big thing was Calgary needs some heroes. Calgary needs some dreamers that we're a little bit, we got too many managers and not enough leaders. I really feel that. I still feel that the arena at that time seemed like a million miles away. Maybe it's closer. Commonwealth Games may be coming, things like that. But one of the groups that I get to work with, and I'm very proud to work with, is Parachutes for Pets, which works to the kind of the social safety net of people and their pets and vulnerable populations in Calgary. And through my 3 months working with them, I've come to hear the stories and see the people that they work with and the impact that they've had. And 10 years ago, Sheldon Kennedy, who was an advocate for kids, told his story about sexual abuse and was an unabashed advocate to help children and help families, started the Sheldon Kennedy Advocacy Center, where he's enough with kids going through this, having to go to 6 or 7 different places to talk to 6 we're going to put them all under the same roof so that the child can come in, be taken care of, and we can make this as unintrusive as possible. That we have to be collaborative, that we can't keep putting up institutional barriers and institutional silos. With that as the inspiration, this week, Parachutes for Pets launched the vision for a new pet advocacy center. I'm really proud of this. I want to share it with you. So I'll thank you guys. I wish you a great long weekend. Thanks to Craig Button. Thanks to Eric Duhatschek. Thanks to Jack. And thanks to Gavin, our producers. And if you can, just stick around, enjoy the video. And if you can help or be part of it, please let me know. See you, not Monday. We're back next Wednesday with a couple of really special guests. Looking forward to that show right here on the Nation Network. Thanks, everybody.
What do you do when things happen and you can't take your beloved pet or keep your beloved pet? My name is Melissa David Smith and I am the founder of Parachutes for Pets. I understand this struggle all too well. In my early 20s, after I had just started my first job, I was diagnosed with cancer. I was single and I had my dog Charlie. He got me through the tough times, he got me through treatment. My doctor had encouraged me to go outside, get some exercise, get some vitamin D for my mental and physical health. I did those things, but I did it for Charlie. 10 years later, I still credit Charlie for getting me through those times. I couldn't have imagined what would have happened if I had to give him up. I created Parachutes for Pets one day in my car on my lunch break. When I heard another story, I kind of hit my breaking point about a pet that had been abandoned at a local pet store. The pet needed severe veterinary intervention and a bunch of other things, and unfortunately the pet had to be euthanized. When I asked why this may have happened, the answer was clear. There wasn't enough resources out there for the low income to be able to provide for their pets. 74% of people report that their mental health is increased by owning a pet. Our most vulnerable populations, such as our seniors, our homeless, our children in foster care, and our domestic violence survivors can all attest to this, and those are the calls we take the most. During COVID, we saw seniors locked down and in isolation, and many seniors will happily tell you that's what got them through. Our main goal at Parachutes for Pets is to keep pets with their guardians, whether that be providing a pet food bank, veterinary resources, education. There's so many gaps out there that we're trying to fill. We are very proud today to be announcing that we are opening the PFP Pet Advocacy Center. This Advocacy Center for Pets is the first of its kind that we're aware of in the world, and we aim to give a voice to pets in Calgary. We're going to do that by offering a larger pet food bank, a pet thrift store, a pet dignity store, pay as you can, as well as education programming and expanding on our vet care program. We're also going to collaborate with partnering organizations to have them all under one roof so that when our clients come here, they can seek their resources as well, whether that be social workers, psychologists. This is a dream come true from where we were 4 years ago. Mental health has been cut more than ever, even by our government now, and we know that pets are a direct line to mental health. Together, we can make a difference in the lives of pets and their guardians in Calgary.